Welcome to my budget deck channel, where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in,
why don't subscribe?
Starting off with Floowandereeze, one of the new decks of the new pack, and obviously I had a look at them because I really like the artwork and I kind of like their playstyle, even though it's some pseudo special summoning, I would call it, because it's not really special summoning because it's all normal summoning, but it's a bit like Yosenju back in the days. It feels like it is the same thing, it's just called differently, but sometimes this is what it is. And first of all, I will be doing a card by card, but let's talk about the elephant in the room again, so people are not getting very upset in the comments. I do run 3 of both of the Floowandereeze trap cards, and there's a reason for this, and the reason isn't necessarily very good. It's mainly because this is a budget deck, and the better options are kind of hidden behind a paywall, which, to be said, in Master Duel isn't as bad as in stuff like Duel Links, for example. But cards you could consider, you could run one or even none of the counter trap. I think most people ditch this card because it's not as good as it reads, especially the whole when effect, and it's not as good as like a Solemn Judgment, for example, on summons. So the whole point of it sometimes gets watered down, but there's 2 reasons why I run this. First of all, stuff like Harpy's Featherstorm, Infinite Impermanence, even Called by the Grave, Ash Blossom, and Dimensional Shifter, Dimension Shifter, very good card in this specific deck. All cards that, well, are ultra rares. So I decided, what can I do about this? I could run some other kind of generic disruption cards, or I could run searchable cards that actually, if they go off, really shut down your opponent's deck. Like against certain decks, this does a lot more than some of the cheap disruptive cards could do, like a Chalice, for example. This card does a lot more, and there's another reason for why I decided to run these cards, because it doesn't really matter if you have them on board. If you don't do anything with it, you can always decide to go for Earthbound Immortal, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. This card is kind of funny. You don't have to run it. You could decide to go like for 3 Raiza, and technically, ratio wise, you probably are fine with the 4 tribute summon monsters, but I like to run a 5th because a few times I did run out of them, and yes, you can recycle Raizas kind of with each other, so 2 is usually fine, but sometimes you needed to banish them with your own cards, and there's a whole lot around it, so I like to go with 5, but 4 is absolutely fine. I like this card because you technically can hand loop your opponent for 3, which is insane. You just send cards back from your field that you don't need. Some of your spell cards that you run in this deck that you just set at the end of the turn, and if you know you're going to go into this card, ripping 3 cards out of your opponent's starting hand can be very nice. Obviously, in some instances, it's not as nice. I like that it's at random. At least your opponent doesn't get to choose. Sometimes they have graveyard effects, and then that is terrible for you. But on the other side, this is very funny. Sadly, your opponent can remove this card quite easily by getting rid of your field spell, but you run tons of ways to get into your field spell, and I will be talking about this in a second as well. First of all, this is a budget deck profile, so we do not run Pot of Duality, and we do not run Pot of Prosperity, because these cards are kind of expensive. If you have them, obviously, they will be subbed in for stuff like Where Arf Thou and Jack in the Hand. And you would have to then like play a proper extra deck. You see, I don't have any extra deck here right now because you really don't need any. It's good to have it, but since most cards that you'll be running, because they're like generically good, are super rare and ultra rares, I didn't want to mention them. You can just put any extra deck together from the good cards, good stuff cards that you have. Most of the time you won't be using them anyway because your monsters all lock you out of special summoning, and well, that is one of the reasons for why probably it is pointless to run extra deck, especially in this kind of variant, but it's never pointless because if you have the cards, put them in for that 1 in 10 situation where that comes up, you can have access to this. So that is that. Starting off with the Floowandereeze cards, we run 1 of each, we run 3 of each Floowandereeze. I know a lot of good decks don't, but they have a lots of way to find the Floowandereeze. You could possibly cut one of them, but I feel like I did have starting hands where I did not start with any Floowandereeze, which sometimes in the good decks doesn't matter that much because you have hand traps and you can stall, and possibly you'll excavate one with the different pots that you run, but this version doesn't have this option. It doesn't have the option to really stall your opponent if you don't manage to get one, and it also doesn't have the option to look for them, excavate stuff, and keep on going until you actually find one. So I wanted to maximize on all the Floowandereeze cards because it is so crucial to this deck that you get one, especially sadly the super rares, because they are the only ones that actually do stuff for the deck. The graveyard one can be a nice disruption sometimes, especially if you go for the hand loop one, which is kind of funny from time to time. And yeah, it's it's okay. In my opinion, you have to run them. The problem is this one is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. But what you're gonna do, it still works in conjunction with your field spell, because you can then just banish a different card, normal summon it, get the card back. So I still would run it at 3. Then coming up to one more card that is kind of like a small tech card in this deck, and I really like it because it's a normal rare and you don't have to invest much, you don't have to play it. But first of all, it's a level 1, which can help you if you go for stuff like Where Arf Thou. Let's say you have this card in hand, normal summon it, go for Where Arf Thou, and you have one of your field spells in hand, then you can instantly normal summon the card that you search with it if you didn't start with one of your Floowandereeze monsters or you want to have a specific one. So this can be quite nice. Also, this card is a nice card to normal summon after you use Empen's effect, because Empen still lets you normal summon after, and usually you've already gone through all of your normal Floowandereeze combos, and most people would then special normal summon stuff like Barrier Statue of the Storm. But since this card is a super rare and I wanted to keep this deck as cheap as possible, I did not include this card. Also, it's kind of boring to be very honest, but yes, it obviously helps you win games, so why wouldn't you play it if you have it? I tried it out with it, but I like this card in the deck, and it makes you draw 2 cards during your next draw phase than 1. Also, technically, you could leave it on board and also shuffle it back into the deck with the Earthbound Immortal if you want to go for this, so this also works. Talking about the Earthbound Immortal, very, very crucial thing to remember is, yes, you will have lots of your Floowandereeze on board a lot of the time, and even more than you need to tribute for, but you cannot use them for this effect. The only one you can use is the big one, because all the other Floowandereeze monsters say if this face-up card would leave the field, banish it instead. Leave the field, not send to the graveyard or anything. So even if you shuffle them back into the deck from the field, they would get banished instead. So this effect then doesn't trigger, it doesn't get the attack, and also you don't get to rip a card from your opponent's hand. So keep that in mind. You have to do shuffle in back your back row, or the big one, or this one. But you don't really want to shuffle back the big one, because the big one's effect is insane. First of all, nice searcher for the deck. This card's loaded with stuff. The search is very important in this specific deck as well. Also, while this tribute summon card is in the monster zone, I mean, how would it be in a spell trap card zone? There's ways, I know, but kind of funny to specify that, so you can't equip it with Union Carrier or whatnot. Your opponent cannot activate the effects of special summoned monsters they control in attack position, which is good against linked monsters specifically, because if your opponent sees you have this card in special summons, like, they can just special summon the cards in defense position, but it stops stuff like Halka Fibrax combos and whatnot. So this is actually quite nice. It's not as oppressive as it sounds, because you can obviously do stuff in defense mode. Special summoning do work that way, but other than that, it's nice. And also, once per battle during damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish 1 card from your hand. It doesn't even have to be a Floowandereeze card, but it's beneficial if you do use one, because you get it back. That opponent's monster current attack and they've become halved until the end of this turn. So it's really hard to run this card over with normal summon monsters even. So it's very, very strong in general. You could, talking about budget point, you could get away with playing it at 1. If you really want to save some stuff, then you could get away with playing this at 1, because you can recycle it. Raiza is a very, very good example for this. There's other stuff, then you banish it from your graveyard with Stri, and then add it to your hand with Toccan. It's all possible. If you believe hard enough, it's all possible. Raiza can shuffle it back from your graveyard into the deck, so that's a thing that can happen. So technically you could cut it down to 1, and technically you do not have to play the continuous spell card if you really don't want to. It has very good use going second. It's very nice that you can shuffle cards that you don't need back into the deck, draw new cards. Usually that's even better if you then draw into hand traps and stuff like this, but in this variant, you won't be drawn into anything too crazy. And next up, we run triple Planet Pathfinder. Hear me out, this card isn't actually that terrible if you happen to have a Floowandereeze in your hand, but not the field spell. So if you have not the field spell in your hand, but a Floowandereeze, you can normal summon this, hope it doesn't get Ash Blossom, but in the end, if you normal summon the Floowandereeze and gets Ash, then that's also terrible. This deck crumbles, like honestly crumbles under hand traps. If your turn gets shut down by basically anything, then you cry. That's just what it is. That's what it is with most budget decks, with most rogue decks and stuff like that. Yes, you want to run stuff like Called by the Grave, for example, have some other ways, but that's what it is. And then if you search the field spell, you can use the effect of the field spell to normal summon the Floowandereeze and then go into other Floowandereeze cards, because you can banish one and that's how you start your combo. So I feel like this card actually works very well in a version where you don't have the opportunity to use Pot of Duality and the Pot of Prosperity. So I feel like this card at 3 is... I like it at 3, but you could cut it down if you have different cards you want to be running, but I felt like the ratio was fine. Also, sometimes if you already have the field spell and one of the Floowandereeze, this could be a neat way to actually beat Ash Blossom of your opponent. So never underestimate that, especially in like gold or whatever, where people don't pay that much attention. Plus, if you normal summon this card, your opponent might think you're playing what, Generator or some kind of nonsense. So yeah, it's always a neat surprise. For the tribute monsters to Raiza, you could run 3 if you like. You could cut this card for a different card. There's cards you could run instead. You could run the other Earthbound Immortal, but I wouldn't recommend it at all. You could run one of the ultra rare Floowandereeze. I don't feel like it's worth it. You could do it if you like to. If you drew it like me, you could put it in if you like. I feel like the 3 normal summon isn't that helpful, and I think there's decks where this card can be utilized, but it would be a completely different variant in my opinion. So Monarch of Darkness is nice, especially because spell trap cards can pose a bit of a problem, because you don't really have anything against this. So technically Monarch of Darkness is fine. You don't have to use its special summon effect. You can just normal summon it like you do with any other monster, since it's a winged beast. Same for Dark Simorgh, works against back row decks if you go first. So yeah, shuts stuff down. Mist Valley Apex Avian, obviously a very good card. Omni Negate, so that is pretty neat. Then we just get into hand traps. Maxi, Ash Blossom, and Dimension Shifter for either of those trap cards is fine as well. One Terraforming, the only ultra rare card you need in this deck. You really do need it. Like, you could get away with just playing Planet Pathfinder and just playing the field spell, but I like to have this. It baits Ash Blossom sometimes. It searches your field spell, which you will need a lot of the time. So this card, I would say, is a must include. But if you really don't have it and you really don't want to invest this as an ultra rare, try it out. Maybe you'll be fine without it. Next up, the big question mark of this deck, Where Arf Thou, because this card has one problem that I'm trying to circumvent a bit by running a triple of the normal trap, is that if you normal summon a Floowandereeze monster, you have to do its combo. Like, you have to keep going, so it doesn't really help if you then search a card. So this mainly only works in combination with the field spell, which is good because I have 7 ways of getting to the field spell. It also works then with the trap card that, first of all, is searchable, and second of all, like, if you run 3, you're more likely to see it. So this could get you one of your Floowandereeze, then start of your opponent's turn, you could still do the whole Floowandereeze combo and go through it and then have the setup that you need. That works. It's not perfect. Obviously, stuff like Pot of Prosperity is better, but it's not as terrible as you think it is. So if you have like Slow Swallow on the field and the field spell, some way to get into it, then that's also neat. You can search the specific card that you want. It helps you for your opponent's turn. It helps you maybe for your next turn, but it doesn't do much without the field spell. So this card it's okay, but it isn't great. Jackanat, on the other hand, is it's not terrible because you either get your Robina or you get your Eglen. So in general, yeah, I think 3 of this card is definitely fine, especially this specific variant, because you get to your Floowandereeze monster, so you stock up from 12 Floowandereeze to 15 in your deck, which is quite nice. So any chance you have the field spell, this card can be quite neat. And also what Where Arf Thou and what Jackanat do is they put a card into your graveyard, which may sound a bit stupid, but it's quite important for Stri actually, because this card's effect is, if it's normal summon, you can target one card in either graveyard, banish it, then immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon a Runic Beast monster. So you have to kind of have a card to banish, so otherwise you can't go into your normal summon chain. And that's the thing, if you actually use one of these cards before, you will have a card in the graveyard and you will be able to use this effect and then start your chain off during your turn, which is quite nice. The field spell, amazing card. You can reveal one Floowandereeze monster in your hand and banish one other Floowandereeze card with a different name. Then normal summon, like it's an extra normal summon. It's not your turn normal summon, it's an extra one. And reveal summon this monster. Then the monster that you banished triggers if it's one of the level 1s. You can add it back to your hand. You have to obviously work out the chains. Like you have to use the normal summon monsters effect first, and then chain link to the one that you banished to add it back to your hand. So it will come back to the hand first. Then you can normal summon it out with the effect of the other Floowandereeze monster. So this is quite neat in total. And yes, you can also, if your opponent normal summons a monster, you can normal summon during your opponent's turn, which is also quite fun from time to time. The permanent spell it's good. You can use your opponent's card, not just monster, an opponent's card they control and send it to the graveyard and basically tribute summon your monsters like this. It's good going second. It's good getting rid of like annoying cards of your opponent because it's not targeting removal. It's not destruction removal. So this is very good removal in total. And if your opponent manages to put up a card, even though you try to disrupt them, this is a way to get rid of them. It's a way to get rid of back row before your opponent can actually use anything. So yes, I like the card, but at 1 it is fine. Also, you can reveal up to 2 winged beast monsters in your hand and place them on the bottom of your deck in any order and then draw the same number of cards. So that helps you cycling through your deck. Not much in this deck to actually draw into, but it still would work at the start if you maybe drew into your 2 Raizas or your tribute monsters and you don't have any Floowandereeze. So this could technically get you to your play start as well. I decided to run 2 Forbidden Chalice. You could go for Book of Moon. I see a lot of people play Book of Moon, and there's reasons for it. The thing is, with Forbidden Chalice, if you go second, I like this card a bit more than Book of Moon because technically against negates, you don't even have to bait them out. You can normal summon like you would Floowandereeze, start your combo. Then if your opponent wants to negate it, you can chain Forbidden Chalice and then negate that monster's effect, which with Book of Moon you cannot do this. So I kind of prefer Forbidden Chalice from time to time. If you want to go for Book of Moon, there's obviously lots of things to consider as well. And already talked about the trap cards. It's really nice to start your plays during your opponent's turn, not relying on them to normal summon for the field spell to work, but at any given time, you will have cards in your hand because your Floowandereeze level 1 monsters all recycle themselves when you tribute them, basically, because then you summon a winged beast, so you can just add the banished ones back to your hand, so you will mainly have stuff in your hand that you can play. And even if during your turn you got kind of disrupted, but you still have one in hand, this still works. Then you can start to establish your board a bit. So I like that as well about this card. And the second effect isn't actually terrible. Since you can decide when to normal summon stuff, you can instantly go for the change all your opponent's monster control to the face down defense position, which is quite neat as well in form of a disruption. This is why I enjoy this card, but they're both searchable, both of these traps. Yeah, you have to decide what kind of ratios you want to run. I kind of like the ratios like this, but obviously, like I said, if you have good cards, then you can cut them completely. I'd still run at least one of them or 2 because I like this card a bit more. This one is very situational, very good, or situationally very bad, but since there's ways in this deck to get rid of it basically while doing stuff with it with the Earthbound Immortal, I think running 3 is fine. It shuts down some decks like quite a bit, so I would try it out. If you don't like it, you can still craft yourself or fill up your deck with good cards that you have. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, do all of these things other YouTubers tell you to do. But most importantly, I hope you have a good day.